What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo coming at you guys with yet another live duel commentary. So for this, we have a bit more of a meta matchup here. On the left, we have Pendulum Magician, one of the strongest decks, if not the strongest deck of the July 2019 format, going up against Orcust, a deck that some people thought was dead, but I think hopefully this gameplay might showcase what Orcust can still do, even though it did lose one of its heavy hitters in the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardish. And I do want to mention that if you guys are going to be in the Philadelphia area on August 17th and 18th, we have a Pro Play Tour tournament coming up, $20 to enter, $2,000 prize pool up for grabs. It's going to be a good time, and I will be there doing live stream coverage for the event. So definitely check out the links in the description, and I hope to see you guys there. So we have the Orcust player kicking things off. We see him starting off with a copy of Engage to grab a copy of Hornet Drones. Having the copy of Hornet Drones is nice because it's essentially just a one-card combo because you have both the token that it creates plus the Kagaria because the Kagaria will recur it, and then you have your full combo, presuming you have one card in hand to discard for the Mermaid. One of the tactics that Orcust is implementing now, and maybe we'll get to see that here, is their end board has shifted to a topologic bomber play. Ooh, we see another copy of Engage, so that means he's probably going to be grabbing a copy of Ego Booster potentially. And so what's interesting about this is that ending on a topologic bomber dragon, you also have two monsters in the graveyard because you're going to have your Orcust Babel on the end board to resurrect and possibly nuke your opponent's board twice. So they have to play through that 2 times unless they can somehow interact with the topologic bomber dragon prior, so that doesn't happen. And then you have all your cards in the graveyard again, so you can set up for next turn because you get the symbol skeleton back the way you arrange your chain links with the Dingirsu, and then you can kind of have your whole engine back online the next turn. So it's actually pretty strong. I don't think it's as strong as, the Rusty Bardish play that we used to have before, but it is still a pretty resilient way that Orcust can still be able to play in this metagame. I mean, Nightmare Mermaid is still legal. I mean, in the OCG, you saw that it's not anymore, so it's a little bit more difficult for Orcust to play in an environment like that. But for us, that's still legal. You pretty much have everything that this deck is capable of doing at its full potential, and we'll just have to see what happens here. So we just have the standard Orcust play going on. We see the Galatea being linked off. He's going to go ahead and get that Nightmare banished to go ahead and send a copy of Harp. Harp is going to special summon Symbol Skeleton. Like I said, this really isn't anything too new. He's probably going to just go ahead and link these off here, and it depends on what else he has in his hand. The one thing about Ego Booster that's interesting is that it does protect his play from hand traps, but as we all know, Pendulum Magician does not pretty much do anything when it comes to hand traps. They don't play any just because they want to play as many combo cards as possible so that they can build their incredibly strong boards going first and help break boards going second. So the Orcust player linked off both cards into a long Girsu and then used the Symbol Skeleton to resurrect the Galatea. He's now using Galatea's effect, shuffling back one of the Orcust cards, which I'm presuming is the Nightmare, and he's going to go ahead and grab the Babel and set that to his field. Again, one of the key combo pieces to allow all of his Orcust cards to become quick effects, which means he can be banishing cards during his turn, or excuse me, during his opponent's turn, to be summoning and then triggering Topologic, Bomber Dragon, different things like that. So here comes the Dingirsu. Dingirsu is going to use its ability to add the Symbol Skeleton as Xyz material. Oh, it's actually going to go for the Harp. Okay, that's interesting. And so at this point, he could have actually possibly shuffled back the Skeleton, now that I think about it. And it's going to essentially result in the same end board. Here's the Topologic Bomber using the Long Girsu as well as the Dingirsu. And that's pretty much all he's got to do. Now at this point, he's pretty much all set to go. He's going to set 1 card and 2 that looked like a crescendo that he hard opened. And there is the 3rd card as well. Having that Ego Booster is also nice because it means the Topologic Bomber cannot be basically has no interaction point once that card does resolve. So just another further way to solidify the board of the Orcust player here. He does have Crescendo set, which he does need a Link monster with the Orcust name in it to use, but we see MST coming down on the Babel. That's really interesting. So that could be pretty significant because that would shut down the Orcust player's ability to pretty much interact, and that could be one of the choke points of the strategy, because if Babel goes, he's not really going to be able to do a whole lot. Now, obviously, he can chain Orcust monsters in response to this, but at the same time, it's going to be a little bit difficult. So we see he's going to go ahead and banish what looked like a copy of Harp, and that's going to be Chainlink 2. Remember, MST is Chainlink 1 here, targeting the Babel. So he may be going for the Symbol Skeleton that he did shuffle back into the deck. It looks like he did. He could be playing a second one, but I'm fairly certain that is what he shuffled back, because it looks like I see a 7-star monster right under the logo there in the center. So Chain resolves, we have the Symbol Skeleton on the field. MST takes out the Babel, and now there's really no points of interaction here from the Pendulum Magician player, but it looks like he's actually playing the Endymion variant because he has his Magical City of Endymion field spell, and this is interesting now because with that card on the field, every time that, you know, their spell counters are always going to be acclimated to the Magical City, and pretty much every time he plays a spell, it's just going to help him double up on all these spell counters for these abilities. Now, he used Foolish Burial to send a copy of Dark Worm, just getting all that value. We see Impermanence being used on the Dark Worm though, so that's interesting. So it's a minus for the Orcust player, but now the Pendulum player doesn't get his gate 0, which could matter just depending on the composition of his hand, but I don't think it's too significant. We do see a Spell Power Mastery though that is going to allow him to get Servant of Endymion. It's going to tick up the Citadel like once again, and he's going to just get a ton of counters here. I mean, now he has Servant. Servant can just help get him into his Master. I mean, there's a lot of plays that he has here. I believe I might actually see a Pot of Desires as well in his hand. We'll just have to see here if he does. So he's going to play Servant. That's going to tick up Endymion to 3 counters, I believe. 1 for the Foolish, 1 for the Spell Power Mastery, and then a 3rd for the Endymion. And now Spell Power Mastery can also put a spell counter on a card. I'm not sure if it's a monster or a card, so it could either be at 4 or 3. Regardless, though, it is going to be at enough to trigger the ability of the Servant, because essentially you can use the spell counters from the Magical City of Endymion for all of these effects. Looks like the players are just trying to work out the numbers of the spell counters and just essentially understand how that works. We're going to see here, this is going to be pretty big. Like I said, targets for Endymion include, or Servant of Endymion, excuse me, include Master. You've got the Jackal King for the effect. Like, there's just a lot you can do with this card. It's such a powerful card. And we know that the Orcust player only has 2 cards in his back row now. He has the Eagle Booster, which is dead effectively at the moment because he cannot use it since he controls a monster in the main monster zone. And that Orcust Climax, or excuse me, Crescendo, which he cannot even use because he does not have an Orcust link. So the player just making sure he doesn't put something in the Topologic Bomber zone, just quickly shifting that over there. Good call. And now he's going to get to special summon one of his monsters. Looks like he's going to go for Master Cerberus, interestingly enough. Now, Master Cerberus does have the ability to banish cards if you get, I believe, 4 spell counters on it. So he might just be trying to bank those up with his Citadel and just being able to use that to pay the cost for Cerberus's effect. That could be an interesting tactic. And he's going to go ahead and finish resolving the effect of that Servant. So he's going to have the Servant and the Master Cerberus both get a spell counter each. And I was thinking on his next play here, he's set up, and that was a Pot of Desires. This could be pretty big, because not only does he get the 2 draws here, but he also is going to get the spell counter as well. And just anytime he's ticking up those spell counters, it's going to put his Cerberus even closer to banishing cards, and could set up for a nice OTK here, because he still hasn't Pendulum summoned. He hasn't even normal summoned, so he's got still plenty of gas to go through. I think he'll be drawing to 3 cards in total, so this will be looking pretty good here. So he's ticking up that Cerberus as well as the Endymion, and couldn't get a good glimpse of what he drew. There might have been another Master Cerberus in there, but I'm not 100% sure. We'll just have to see how this plays out. It looks like he's going to use the effect of the Master Cerberus. Potentially, anyway. And he's going to banish the Topologic Bomber Dragon. So Bomber Dragon's gone. No need to worry about that anymore. It's going to clear off those counters. And it looks like, ooh, is that a, that might be a copy of Pendulum Halt on the left there. That's a card you don't see very often. We'll see if he ends up playing it, but he does need to get monsters in his extra monster zone before he can. But now we're making the Electromite. Electromite just going to be the ultimate playmaker here and start setting him up nicely. He'll just be able to go ahead and get whatever card he needs. Electromite just pretty much being one of the, you know, central components of this Pendulum strategy. Even at 1, it's still incredibly powerful. It's going to send a copy of Jackal King that's going to help him possibly just set up, but it's also a big body as well. I believe it's 2400, so he should be able to do a pretty significant amount of damage. I believe he also has a... Oh, is that the... that is the other Endymion, the one that special summons from the hand, I believe. I do not remember what that one's name is off the top of my head. And there is the Magister. So Magister special summons from the extra deck. and the one on the left special summons from the hand. Servant, again, special summoning from the deck. We saw that previously. So he's got a lot going on here. He's got the spell counters just adding up on the Magical Servant. And there is the Pendulum Halt. Okay, so for those of you guys who do not know, this is a card. It's a normal spell card, and it reads, I believe if you have 3 or more face-up Pendulum monsters with different names in the extra deck, you get to draw 2. So it's like a Pot of Greed, which is pretty cool, but I think it has a drawback where you can't like add cards from your deck to hand for the rest of the turn. So it kind of has to be one of the last cards you play, but that's a really nice card for being able to refuel your hand. I'm not particularly a fan of it because I feel like it's a little bit niche and it's very situational for when you can pull it off. Obviously, Pendulum Magician has no issue filling up its extra monster zone, but like I don't know if it's like more of like a win more card, or it's just the fact that it's like too situational. You kind of want to have as many live cards in your hand as possible, because otherwise your plays might be stagnated in a way that you don't necessarily, you know, it doesn't really make sense. So I don't know, it's a little bit tough. But we do see a Zephyr Metaltron coming down here, and now it looks like we're gonna go to the battle phase. So it doesn't look like there's really an OTK, but it looks like Master Cerberus can hit in for I believe Master Cerberus is 28. And Zephyr Metaltron as well, but that's actually going to do it. It looks like the Orcust player has seen enough, and we are going to go to game number 2. Yeah, like I said, knowing that those 2 back row weren't really going to be doing much for him whatsoever, I think it was just probably the best call to just scoop it up and go to game 2. Now we have the side decks in play, so do keep that in mind. There could be plenty of Pendulum hate in the Orcust player's side deck. Artifact Lancia is more than likely going to be seen in the Pendulum Magician player's deck, just to slow him down. We'll just have to see. Orcust always wants to go first. We see a normal summon of Sangan, so this is cool. So Sangan is actually a 1-card combo for Orcust as well. He's going to link Sangan off into Almirage and then use Sangan's effect to search for probably a Crusadia monster. And typically it's Crusadia Arborea. Yes, there it is. So what's cool about this combination is that Crusadia Arborea's effect to special summon is not an effect, actually. It's a summoning condition, so it's kind of like Cyber Dragon. So Sangan prevents you from using the effects of whatever you search for the rest of the turn, but because Crusadia Arborea's summoning condition isn't actually an effect, it actually bypasses that restriction, and you can just special summon it to the zone Almirage points to, and now you can do a full Orcust combo. So again, Sangan and Almirage just have so much amazing synergy, not just in Orcust. We see it in stuff like Altergeist, which unfortunately lost 2 multi-faker on the list, so I don't really know how viable that deck is, but there's just so many different cool ways to take advantage of Sangan and Almirage together, and you get to see it here that that's just one of the ways. So if you're playing Orcust and you're looking for more ways to just access your combo with 1 card and 1 discard, obviously, that might be a way you want to go ahead and, you know, implement it, or at least test it out, see what you think. I think it's pretty cool. The OCG's done it as well, so it's it may not be the best approach necessarily. I don't really know because the metagame is still open, but any way you can access your Orcust combo for 1 card sounds pretty good to me. So now we're just seeing the standard Orcust combo again. This really isn't going to be anything too new here. It's pretty much going to end on the exact same board. We saw the Pendulum Magician player handled it pretty well last time. I think the biggest the biggest drawback for the Orcust player was the fact that he didn't really have any disruption except for that infinite impermanence, which I feel like he might have shotgunned a little bit too early on that Dark Worm. He could have possibly used that to stop something, you know, just something else, but, you know, it is what it is. We'll just have to see how else he decides to adapt his strategy. It might be the same end board. We do see an Ash Blossom in the Orcust player's hand, though, so that could be significant. Ash Blossom isn't the... It's not like the strongest hand trap against Pendulum Magician, but it depends on what Pendulum Magician opens. Sometimes if you Ash a Pendulum Call, that could just be the nail in the coffin for them, because if they don't have what's necessary. We got to see a Scrap Recycler from the Orcust player. That's also a nice card. It's essentially a Foolish Burial for machines, which the deck pretty much is all comprised of, so that's pretty nice. But the board's looking exactly the same for the most part, but he will have that Ash to defend himself, and we'll just have to see if that Ash can get him there. I also see another impermanence as well, so multiple layers of disruption here. There's a Foolish Burial as well. I don't think that's going to matter too much. I guess just a little bit of deck thinning doesn't hurt. But if you think about it, you're going to have an Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, an infinite impermanence, and if Topologic Bomber Dragon doesn't get dealt with, you effectively have 2 complete board wipes as well that your opponent has to play through. So that sounds pretty good. We'll just have to see how well it actually matters here. So it looks like we're going to see the Topologic Bomber Dragon again. Hopefully, anyway. Looks like the Orcust player is just contemplating, but should be the play. Oh, he's going to go for a second Galatea. Interesting. I wonder why he opted not to go for the Bomber. Maybe just because it didn't work so well in the last turn. Because I'm fairly certain that's an Impermanence and not a Crescendo. Very interesting here. So now with this board, he has the Impermanence, he has the Ash, and then he also has... Oh, wow. So Pendulum Magician player opening the MST once again. Maybe he just feared getting blown out again in a similar fashion. And now we're going to see the Ningirsu, or excuse me, we're going to see Symbol Skeleton be chained in response so that he can special summon the Dingirsu. Looks like he's also using Galatea so he can shuffle one of his Orcus back to set a copy of Crescendo for his next turn, just potentially setting up. He cannot use that Crescendo this turn, but if the turn does play back, he will have a way to possibly negate something. And now we're also going to see Harp special summon the Nightmare from the deck. And now the Dingirsu is going to most likely attach the Symbol Skeleton to him as material. Also keep in mind that Galatea is linked, which means it cannot be destroyed by battle. The one thing I also don't like about this either is that Galatea is also giving the Pendulum Magician player an arrow, and typically that's not that big a deal, but when you're going against Pendulum Magician, giving them an extra arrow for summons from the extra deck is very significant, and you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. It doesn't happen too often that it matters, but it is very significant. It could possibly be the reason why you lose. Them getting that extra monster from the extra deck could be just the game decider. So we see a copy of Mythical Beast Master Cerberus come down here. The Pendulum player, or excuse me, the Orcus player is actually going to let that go through. This is actually an interesting point where sometimes you want to use your Ash Blossom, because since Master Cerberus is a scale 4, it can actually hinder their ability to Pendulum Summon very significantly, and it's very difficult for them to remove that Master Cerberus. So sometimes ashing Master Cerberus can be very, very effective. It just depends, obviously, on what their hand is, but again, just something to keep in mind. I've had games where I've ashed Master Cerberus against Pendulum Magician players, and their whole turn just crumbled because they really needed that to go through. So now we see the Jackal King come down in the scale. That is going to use its effect to send itself to the extra monster zone and special summon the Master Cerberus to an extra monster zone. So we can either use Galatea, the arrow Galatea is pointing towards, or his own extra monster zone. Either one will suffice in this instance. I think the Pendulum Magician player was just checking to see if Galatea can be destroyed by battle or not, or maybe if it has any other protections. Looks like there's possibly a Time Gazer in his hand. I think there was another Pendulum Halt, actually. And see another copy of Jackal King, too. We'll just have to see. Oh, it was a Servatum Endymion. I apologize. That looked like a Time Gazer. So now we're going to see the link up here into Electromite. And I believe that gives him 3 monsters in his extra monster zone with different names, so he could Pendulum Halt here. Impermanence coming down on the Electromite is pretty significant, though, because now he doesn't get to set up his extra monster zone. Here's the Pendulum Halt, so he's got 3. He's going to get to draw 2, but he will not get to add any other cards from deck to hand for the remainder of the turn. There's the Ash Blossom for the draw 2, so that could be significant here, because now he only has 2 cards. If those are not scales, he's not going to be able to Pendulum Summon. Ooh, it could be rough. Electromite losing out on all 3 effects, but that doesn't negate those arrows, giving him those left and right zones, and not to mention Galatea is giving him an arrow too. So that is pretty significant, but I think the Ash and the Impermanence might have done it here. We'll just have to see. Remember, the Pendulum Magician player has not used his normal summon, so he's still got that. Oh, no, he actually, I apologize. He did normal summon Servant, so his normal summon's also eaten up, too. So his options are very limited. I think there's a Jackal King and a Gate 0 in his hand, so that's a low scale, and I believe Jackal King's like a 4. So he could Pendulum Summon Servant, but I don't think that's really going to get him anywhere. It looks like the Pendulum Magician player is just trying to look in his extra deck for anything at this point. And if he can't handle this board, I think the Orcust player is just going to turn around and win this one pretty easily. We'll have to see, though. And he just passes with the Electromite. Yeah, the Orcust player should be able to clean this up very easily Orcust, once it gets another turn, especially if its interruption board doesn't go interrupted whatsoever, should be able to just, he even has a Dingirsu on the board, so he can just summon another one. He can just clean that up. He should be able to easily amass the Borosword OTK just with this board alone. Literally one more monster on the field is all he would need, and he's just going to link them off into Borosword. He already has the symbol skeleton, so he can resurrect that and bring back the Dingirsu, and that would be way more than enough damage. Oh, he has engaged too, so he even has protection for the Borosword in the form of Ego Booster if he so wishes, but he really doesn't even need it at this point. It's obviously just going to be, it should be GG for the Pendulum Magician player here, but it looks like he's going to play it out just in case. You never know. The thing is, when you're going up against Pendulum Magician, I guess game 2, it's a little bit different because you do have to consider the fact that Artifact Lancia is a card to consider, but I feel like the Pendulum Magician player would have dropped Lancia very quickly, especially just to, stop any of these cards from being summoned, since Babel is no longer on the field, so they can't be chained in response. So at this point, with Lancia most likely being the only card to worry about, yeah, I mean, this is pretty much, all wrapped up here. And now we see he's sending Wand with the Nightmare. He's just setting up just in case there is anything else, but we can tell from our perspective, at least anyway, because we have perfect information, that this should be a game 2 in favor of Orcust. Now, game 3, though, is going to be interesting because Pendulum Magician will get to go first, and this is where Pendulum Magician thrives the most. However, Orcust does play a nice slew of hand traps. We've seen Impermanence from this player. We've seen Ash Blossom from this player. Some of the builds of Orcust play Effect Veiler even. Just depends on how hard they want to go on the hand traps, but because their combos only require 1 to 2 cards for the most part, they've got the room to play the hand traps, almost similar in a sense to like Salamangreat. So we'll just have to see. It looks like the Pendulum Magician player just making sure he had game, and it looks like he's going to scoop things up. All right, so game number 3. Looks like there's, oh wow, there's an Effect Veiler and an Ash Blossom for the Orcust player here. So this is going to be interesting. Remember, hand traps are a little bit iffy sometimes against Pendulum Magicians, but 2 disruptions might be enough. Again, letting that Master Cerberus go through, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like ashing that is very significant just to mess up their scales, because if they can't get rid of it, they might not be able to Pendulum Summon whatsoever, and that could just be the game right there. So here comes a Jackal King. Jackal King's gonna destroy itself, and it's going to special summon back out the Cerberus. That gives him 1 monster without using his normal. The whole objective of Pendulum Magician, remember, you're trying to get those 2 monsters on the board to your Electromite before you have to necessarily commit to your normal summon. That's ideal, or your Pendulum Summon for that matter, because that way you can go off and just do your crazy combos. Normal summoning a copy of Garuda, and that will give him the Electromite. Looks like he's going to go ahead and go for that. This Electromite is not going to get its effect because Veiler is immediately going to take care of that. And again, it's pretty bad because you don't get to do that. However, wow, Pendulum Halt all 3 games, and there's an Ash Blossom for that. That is, that's pretty big. I mean, again, Ash Blossom might be more significant on something like Harmonizing Magician or anything like that, but no, the Pendulum Magician player just passes turn. That is crazy. And now Orcust with a 4-card hand. It looks like he has an Instant Fusion. I think a Foolish Burial, which lets him pretty much get any Orcust card he wants. I think there's a Called by the Grave as well, which against Pendulum Magician isn't the greatest. I guess hitting Dark Worm is pretty significant, but I think there's also maybe a Symbol Skeleton in his hand as well. I'm not sure what exactly is in the Orcust player's deck, so it's a little bit hard to predict what plays he can make. Oh, he actually drew a Nightmare. That was not a skeleton, so he actually only has a way to access 1 monster at the moment. Well, technically 2, because he has Foolish Burial plus Instant Fusion, so he technically can get 2 monsters on the field. We'll just have to see what he's able to go into. The biggest problem is that, so he's going to Instant Fusion for Thousand Eyes, take the Electromite. The issue that I was foreseeing is that if he goes Foolish to send, let's say, one of his Orcust cards to get the effect, the issue becomes then he can't go into Mermaid because Mermaid isn't a dark, so he can't do the combo just to assemble Borosword and OTK. It's unfortunate he didn't get any way to access his combo without doing this route. It's a little bit difficult to see what he sent off the Foolish because it's just off camera, but I'm sure we'll see what it is soon enough. Oh, it looks like he actually sent, is that a copy of, that's a copy of Mecha Phantom Beast Olion. because Olion actually summons a token, and because he's playing Scrap Recycler is a 1-card combo, so he doesn't have to actually get, he actually doesn't have to use one of his Orcust, and he might be able to assemble an OTK here. And he's going to pitch the Nightmare, and he has to special summon another Nightmare, which is a little bit unfortunate. I believe, I'm not sure if he can actually OTK though, because I think he needs one more monster to be able to pull it off. Let's see, because the problem with Burl Sword Dragon is that you need 3 monsters to make it. And so the question becomes, can he get the 3rd monster on the field to be able to close it out? You know, actually, I think he can. I take that back. This might be an OTK here, because now he can banish the Nightmare. He can use that to send the Harp. Harp can go ahead and summon Skeleton. He can link those off and make another... There has to be a way. I'm fairly certain he can OTK here. We'll just have to see, though. So he's going to use Galatea's effect. Oh, no. It looked like he was going to use Galatea's effect, but he's going to actually link them off into probably a Longirsu. Okay. He's going to use the effect of Skeleton, banish it, resummon his Galatea. And now at this point, he's going to make the Dingirsu. Dingirsu can reattach one of the materials. And so if that's all he's got, he's going to take a pretty big hit here. That would be 26, and I believe Longirsu is also like 26. Longirsu might actually be 25, actually. And he's going to hit with both. So 25, 26, so that is 5,100 damage. That's going to put the Pendulum Magician player down to 29. Not the worst. He's going to link them off, though, into the Bomber Dragon. So Pendulum Magician player with only a couple cards in hand. Oh, no, he's going to go for the Galatea. Okay. So Galatea, he's going to use the effect. Now, he can either grab the Babel or he can grab the Crescendo. He's going to go for the Crescendo. Interesting. He does have the Disruption with Dingirsu regardless. So now he'll have Crescendo plus Called by the Grave plus the Dingirsu that can actually send a monster to the graveyard. So this is actually can send any face-up card, so that's actually even better in this case. And Pendulum Magician player draws for turn. This isn't going to be the easiest board to play through. It's not impossible, but Pendulum Magician just needs to get those scales. And it looks like that's going to do it. Orcust is going to take it. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video, and we'll catch you next time.